Welcome to God is Not an Asshole. If you are one of the many people done with religious dogmatism, hang on. You might sense transcendence, but your church or other faith community never seem to get off the ground. You realize that to honor your conscience means more than fitting in and keeping hard to explain rules. Hang on. You could probably think of the goodness in your tradition and you tried your best to save that baby, but honey, there's so much bathwater. Join your hosts, David Norman Moore Jr. in California and Carrie Connolly in New Jersey, who are collaborating to bring on guests who have found life on the other side of fundamentalism. Guests with stories of how they have liberated themselves from beliefs that divide us from each other. None of our guest narratives are identical, but we hope you'll find something in common with each of them. We invite you to experience our common bond as we all inspire even more of us to embrace the true self.
Well, we're excited, Carrie and I, to have Sahar Alsahlani here today. Sahar, this is how we met. She's on the board for the Parliament of the World Religions and a whole bunch of other stuff. But we met back in, I think it was 2016, at Standing Rock, at the demonstration, the direct action that was happening there. And there were, like thousands of people and different speakers. And then Sahar was one of the presenters. And when you spoke, Sahar, I thought, I gotta be in contact with this woman. And so the whole crowd was streaming away when it was over, and I was walking against the grain. People were walking one way, and I was going the other way, trying to weave through, so that I didn't miss you.
Oh my God!
And I just introduced myself, and we talked for a moment, and I asked for your phone number. I probably sounded kind of weird.
No, it was an honor to meet you, Reverend. It was such an honor to meet you. And then we became Facebook friends, right? And then
Yep.
Yeah, and then I had an event in Santa Barbara, and you had mentioned to me if you
So
ever go to Santa Barbara.
I said, if you're ever in Santa Barbara, I would love to have you speak at our church. And the thing is that I never really imagined you'd ever
Me
be
either.
in Santa Barbara. And then, like, several months later, I get a message from you saying, I'm going to be officiating a wedding in Santa Barbara with a couple of my gay friends. And I just thought, wow, this is an amazing Muslim woman here. So you did speak at our church, and, we never did actually fully break contact. And we've had encounters off and on for the past several years.
Oh yeah.
Sahar, go ahead and say something about yourself before
Oh
we
my
get into the
gosh.
weeds.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for being here. I am so proud of your success. I've been following you guys. This is awesome. I'm Sahar Alsahlani. I am originally, my parents are from Iraq. I am Shiite Muslim. I was raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I have I have about 12 years experience in radio and television in Los Angeles as a producer. And then I came over here, joined an intentional multi-faith community, started really getting into theology and interfaith activism. And the rest is history. And Reverend Moore has been one of my trusted confidants, and it was a blessing that day when you came up,
Oh,
Yeah,
amazing.
go ahead and tell us. You just mentioned that you grew up in Pittsburgh, but that's just part of the story. Tell
Oh,
us about
yeah.
your neighborhood.
I did grow up in Squirrel Hill, which is actually, I grew up in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. I grew up about 6 blocks away from his house. And I was a child in the 70s, and he really was our neighbor. I mean, we had no idea that he was larger than WQED television in Pittsburgh, and his church was right across the street from the the synagogue, Tree of Life Synagogue, and attached to the Tree of Life Synagogue was the Jewish Community Center. So we would see um, Mr. Rogers walking and doing his, like going to exercise every morning at that pool, and we'd see him everywhere, But like I said, we
I
just
could
never
use some
thought.
serious Mr. Rogers energy in my life right now.
Exactly. I think we all could. I think we
Yes.
all could. Yeah, and it was such a different time and place then. I mean, like I always say, we didn't know who was who. Like at that time, it was such a diverse community, a very intellectually sophisticated community. So we had students from everywhere, and we didn't really care what religion you were or your race or where you came from or whatever. It's just what did you bring for lunch? Can I trade you? Or are you good in kickball? That's all we worried about. But yeah,
So Sahar, you mentioned the Tree of Life Synagogue, and back in 2018, that was traumatic for your former neighborhood. Maybe say a word about that.
well, as an Iraqi American and as somebody that continuously does nonviolent resistant work, I expected news like that from Baghdad, from maybe Syria. I never, ever, ever expected that. I mean, it was like just come back from Charlottesville. Like, I had never, ever, ever expected that in Squirrel Hill, Pittsburgh, ever. And looking back, I mean, maybe I'm looking at it through rose-colored glasses, but when we were kids, like I said, it wasn't utopic. I mean, there certainly were issues, but we never had the divide and conquer that I see now. I mean, never would I imagine that one of the own Mr. Rogers kids would become radicalized and go and shoot up the synagogue while people are praying. Ever, 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 ever.
I think that that's such a human response. I think most people who find themselves in a situation like that all kind of look around and go, how is this my life? How am I living this and not watching this on the news? This is something that happens on the news. It doesn't happen here, among my
Yeah,
people. I think that's such a human response.
exactly, exactly. It came out of nowhere. I mean, and then a lot of us Mr. Rogers kids, we started a Facebook string. How are you? Where are you guys? A lot of us sort of did a pilgrimage back to Pittsburgh for the first week afterwards, and it was tough. It was tough. Like I said, it really happens in your own backyard. A lot of healing. Great interfaith response, though. Wonderful interfaith response. But I always think, like, what would Mr. Rogers think? Like, so I'd sit quietly and try to talk to myself or talk to him. It's like, how could he would be crying? I mean, he would not believe
Yeah.
this is happening.
It's so interesting. That reminds me of another kind of cultural phenomenon that's happening on TikTok right now, which is very similar. So Steve from Blues Clues, who is kind of like my kids Mr. Rogers, right?
Yeah,
My kids
yeah.
watch Mr. Rogers too, but he was for them, right? And he has this thing now where he comes onto TikTok and all he does is say, like he did back then, he talks to the audience and like acts like he's listening, and he just says, "Hey, how are you? How's it
Yeah.
going?" And the comments are heart wrenching and beautiful at the same time, but heart wrenching. Like, you didn't tell me it was going to be this hard, Steve. You didn't prepare me for this. Or, hey, Steve, I got up again today, and I count
Mhm.
that as a win. Some of the comments are absolutely beautiful, and it's kind of this little phenomenon that's happening on TikTok right now.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to there's part of this human condition that is looking for gentleness in our leaders.
Yes,
Wow.
definitely, definitely, definitely. I mean, they were our comfort when we were kids, and they would listen to us. Like it's not it's not common that somebody asks a 3-year-old, "How are you?" and then pause and wait for a response. And
Right,
that's kind of what
right.
Mr. Rogers did. He was just
Yeah,
silent, and you're like, "Okay." Even on the
yeah,
You
television
know,
set, he did that.
yeah.
looking at Pittsburgh and the Tree of Life Synagogue again, where 11 people were mercilessly cut down by a shooter. Um, there is a rise in anti-Semitism that has to be acknowledged, and um, as Sahar, not just as a Muslim but as an interfaith person, How is this impressing you?
Well, I think it was definitely a case of anti-Semitism, but I think the population that might be radicalized, that's having an identity crisis, simply target the other for fear of
Ah,
being
yes.
outnumbered. And at that particular day, there was there's an organization called HIAS, Jewish Refugee Resettlement Program, which was having a meeting to bring in Syrian refugees. So I think it was a combination of several things, and the person
Mm.
the person that did the shooting was a child of Pittsburgh, had become a loner, had really gravitated towards listening to the radio a lot, lived in isolation, and completely shifted his whole mentality. And they prey upon people. These kind of big organizations, they prey upon vulnerable people to recruit, to give orders to manipulate whatever theological scripture they're using to fit their agenda. They usually give them a stipend, maybe even supply them with ammunition. So
Wow.
it was kind of a collapse of so many different phenomenon.
I think that that really speaks to what in the work that I do. One of the things that I've really become fascinated with is the wound of dominance, right? The ways that systems of dominance have identities that move through them, and some of those identities are dominant themselves, but they are deeply wounded, right? Because a system of dominance wounds everybody differently, right? And in all ways, it steals our aspects of our humanity. And I think the under recognized thing that is going on is that, for example, in many cases, shooters like this are straight white men, and they are having a trauma response
Yeah,
that's called
absolutely.
annihilate. There's this annihilate trauma response that's hardly ever talked about, and it's equated with an animal who fears that their life is about to end, right? That it's a life or death situation, and they give a last ditch effort to just annihilate the threat. And I see that in
Yeah.
these mass shooting situations, and a lot of it has to do with the ways that the white patriarchy cuts men off from self
Hum-
care.
Yeah,
humanity.
humanity. I
From
mean,
yeah,
that's
you
like the
know,
one demographic that, I mean, if you are a straight white male, it is the hardest to get into college. Christian male, you know what I mean?
hmm
American male. I mean, people don't realize um, that they are the first, sort of like on the front line for any kind of diversity training or any kind
hmm
of, affirmative action. And, and I saw that when I was in Charlottesville too, and,
hmm
when there was these gentlemen, we were on the front line and they were saying, Jews will not replace us. First of all, they thought I was Jewish. I'm like, no, you got the wrong flavor here,
right,
No, but
right,
I was telling him, I was like, you guys worship the most famous Jew of all time. I mean, it hadn't even
right.
really connected, and I said, why would I ever want to replace you?
hmm
When you have a
Right.
grown man who's, has his dignity and is maybe a general in, one of the military installations, or has a family and a house and a mortgage, like, who says that you will not replace me? I mean, that is a sign of, that's what you say when a 2 year old, when you're 2 years old and a baby comes home or something, you
Right,
know
right. hmm
and I was like, why would I ever want to replace you? I said, first of all, you might be an army pilot. I mean, you certainly don't want me flying a plane. You don't want me
hmm
fixing a rocket. Why would I ever? Nobody would, want me to do that. And I think when I had deep conversations with a lot of that community, like, not a lot, I mean, but I had some two or three really wonderful conversations. And, they're like, well, maybe we'll be put in concentration camps. Well, maybe we'll be put in this. I'm like, why would I ever want to put you in a concentration camp, or make you a slave, or make you
hmm
anything? We this country's done that. It obviously hasn't worked. It's against everything I believe in. Just kind of relax. I'm not here to get you. I'm not here to
hmm
get you at all. And I think our a lot of the people, consequently, who were there, and the shooter, we were Mr. Rogers' generation. you know.
Yeah.
And so Mr. Rogers always
Yeah.
said it's okay to cry, it's okay to talk about your feelings. He was, you know, he preached nonviolence very subtly, but everything he did was anti-war, everything he did was you know, vegetarian, veganism. And so
Anti-racist.
anti-racist, exactly, exactly. And I wonder if we had, why did we forget the message of what Mr. Rogers taught us? I mean, how did society fail? Like, you know, that entire generation, we kind of relied on him till we were like, what, 9, 10, and then you kind of get cool and, you know, oh, I'm not going to watch Mr. Rogers. But if we just remember that, you know what I mean?
I think that well, I think that one of the things that, and going back to the ways in which, especially not just straight white men, but especially straight white men are removed from access to their own emotions, right? The only emotion that's appropriately, according to society, appropriate for a man to express is anger,
Yeah.
right? Anger and violence, and so
What do you know
when
about that, Carrie?
oh gee,
I don't know if I think it's a male thing. No offense there, Reverend.
so yeah, like but I've even had conversations with members of for example the police who say, listen, I can't even go to marriage counseling because if my work finds out that I'm in marriage counseling, I'll be desked, I'll be subjected to being on the desk, right? So God forbid we let the people who carry the guns legally, right, have proper mental health care.
Wow.
It's
Spiritual
such a
care too. Yeah.
it's yeah it's such a broken system, and I
Exactly.
think that a lot of times we're not willing to look at the ways that the dominant identities are harmed in these systems,
Yeah.
and do something about it,
No, absolutely. I mean, society failed the shooter as much as it failed the synagogue.
Indeed,
Yeah.
yeah.
You know?
And
Wow.
when I say things like that, that is not an attempt to justify their
No,
behavior
not no.
Right.
at
Right.
all, right?
No, no, it's
I
just the
get,
reality, you know? It's the
yeah.
reality.
So, like, I remember reading a CNN article where there was a mental health care worker who was like, stop associating mass shooters with mental health issues.
Right.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
but when did we decide that perpetrating a mass shooting was a sign of mental health? Like,
Phew.
how is that a healthy state of mind, right?
Yeah.
We have to be willing to address the mental state of these men who are perpetrating these
Yeah.
things. So
The mental state.
I'll get off my soapbox about that
No,
one.
So,
no, the
so
spiritual
Sahar,
state, you know?
thank you for that, Carrie. Sahar, Carrie's just meeting you, and you know, during the lockdown, uh, you and I, and Kenichi Yoshida and Matt Lowe and Tim Nafziger and Sue Parker, and for a short time also Cheryl Bear up in Canada, our Indigenous friend. We had this diverse group, of people with disabilities and, Korean and Japanese and white
Indigenous,
and
yeah.
indigenous. All we had this group of about six people or so. I forgot what we called our puzzle piecers. But then you gave us another name somewhere along something superheroes or something. I
Oh,
can't.
yeah, yeah, I totally forget what that was. Well, for me, it was like group therapy. That's what really got
Yeah.
me through the entire pandemic.
So
Is
yeah.
every
So
Friday
what
we
we
meet.
did, Carrie, what we did is every Friday um, at noon, which was for Sahar being in Manhattan was 3 p.m. People in different zones. We got together for an hour every week during the lockdown, and we just had conversations, without an agenda. What was going on? So we were on, like, when George Floyd was murdered, and so many things, and Donald Trump was telling people to take bleach, and all this stuff was going on, and just to I don't know if this was a stated intent, but we were preserving our sanity just by being friends, and so most many of us have never seen each other in person. Some of us have, but
Yeah, not all of
Sahar
us. Yeah.
especially, being in New York, a lot of the folks she's never met in person, but we are true friends. Even though it's a virtual situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Like, no, that's really probably one of the main things that got me through that time was that we knew that every Friday for an hour there would be somebody and we would just show up. If it was two of us, if it was six of us, if it was we had a visitor. No, and it really
So,
was
so,
a way for
so
me
I
to.
have heard, I have heard a lot of Sahar and stories of. So, can you tell, to kind of, level things out? Tell, tell Carrie and me something about your life, your experience that I don't know. All right.
Hmm,
Hmm.
gosh. Well, I originally, I mean, I had my master's in public health. I thought I was going to go to medical school, but that was too hard. And so, I mean, it was really difficult to get into med
Everything is
school.
hard when you don't want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, my sisters are all physicians, so but I couldn't do it. And so then I remember convincing my dad and my husband at the time that I'm just going to go for a doctorate in public health. And they're like, "All right, that sounds good. We'll buy that. Why not? We still call you doctor. And
Mhm.
so then I really always had a creative bug inside of me. Always had a creative bug. And so my children were really young at the time. The two older ones were like 4 and 5, and I just said, I can't, I don't want to do this. And so then I was walking. There was an audition for a local cable company, and they were having like auditions for hosts for their, before they used to be cable access shows. And I was like, oh, this
Yeah.
could be kind of fun. And I went to the audition. I giggled the entire time. I'm like, three fires rage through Liberty City, and a hurricane is coming. And I mean, I mean, I was not meant for to be on air at all. And so I said, let me learn a little bit about this. So I enrolled in school, 2 years. Everybody thought I was working on my PhD, but I was running around making music videos. I was on South Beach. I was like taking classes and graphics and color and just everything. And then when I graduated, they realized that I was not getting a doctorate, that I was getting a degree in radio and television. But I mean, sometimes, like Mr. Rogers, he spread his gospel in a very creative way. So hopefully there's a way where I could merge the two one day, inshallah.
Inshallah. Yes.
Love it. I love it. So how did that all end up for you? Like where to, because I like David has said, I know nothing about you, so
Oh,
please tell me how did that all,
yeah.
and tell our listeners.
Yeah. Well, luckily the dean of my school was really, really wonderful, a Colonel Sonny Craven. And for a colonel to take on, I was an older student then. I mean, I wasn't a kid, and I was giggling. He's like, let's get you a tracheotomy. He's like, I don't know what to do with you. And I was like, but he always told me, he said, concentrate on behind the scenes. He goes, on-air talent is always replaceable. He said, he says, learn, and he would work me hard. He would put me on lighting grids. I mean, to put me this. I mean, talk about cables, like everything. And eventually I graduated, and USA Networks came to Miami during that time and opened up a series of channels. And I was one of the first hires there. Chris Sloan was my boss. It was in Miami Beach. And I just was working there for a couple years. I eventually had my divorce and said, it was around 2001 when there was a lot of layoffs and, the economy wasn't good. And so I said, you know what? I'm dying to go to California, dying to. My parents were like, what are you going to do today? And nobody was really paying attention to me. But thank God, I ended up, Chris got me an interview and I ended up getting a job. And I just told everybody I was going on vacation, packed my kids up, registered them in Islamic schools in Pasadena, and just went on a plane. And this is somebody I had a very early marriage. I had an arranged marriage at 16, and it's before college and everything. So I had never even been on a plane by myself. And here I am with two little appendages, what I mean? And I go to the
Wow.
front desk, like to the airline ticket, which was empty because it was right after 9/11. And I was like, here's my stuff. Just figure it out. And we ended
Wow.
up getting like first class seats. We were like the only three people on the plane. And then I ended up landing in LA, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in LA with two kids, like what the heck am I doing? But I mean, God worked it out for me. I mean, I went right into a religious community. I mean, any kind of parochial school, you get a built-in community, and, my parents and eventually the ex-husband, and they just knew that that's what I wanted. And I was able, thank God, to make a living and raise them there, and that's all you want to do at the end of the day. Do what you like and, you know,
Yeah.
and do
Well,
that.
thank you for being you and catching us up a little bit. I want to go deep now, all right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
As a
I wait, oh
Shiite
wait, oh wait.
Muslim,
I'm just kidding.
mhm, as a Shiite Muslim, I know you have to have some thoughts about what's happening
Yes.
in Lebanon right now. Can you talk about that a bit?
Sure. Well, as an Arab and as a Muslim, I cannot remember one time in my life where Palestine wasn't on the forefront of everybody's mind. Everybody's mind, and there's a real strong belief about Arab nations is that we can't thrive unless we succumb to bowing down to Israel. And a lot of countries that don't do that will get persecuted. I mean, you saw what happened to Iraq.
So
You
you're
know,
talking about global Zionism?
well, no, no, no. I think the support of Israel. No, I don't really think it's Zionism. I think that there's a support of Israel that is so unmatched that anybody that says anything about it will get repercussions and disciplined, even if you're the largest supplier of oil in the world. There is this feeling of
Tell us, who is the largest
well, Saudi
supplier?
Arabia, Iraq is second. And crude oil
Wow.
and gasoline, and if you do not recognize the state of Israel at that time, or maybe even now, and do not sell out your Palestinian siblings, then you will get a spanking, whether it's militarily, whether it is economic wise, whether it is almost anything. You will be demonized, um, and not allowed to thrive. You really are not allowed to thrive, and that's a feeling that we have that, I mean, people sometimes when they, I think I've said this to you before, Reverend, people come to me and they're like, oh, do you speak English? Or, we had to really go and change the regime and basically like domesticate. And I was like, I beg your pardon. I said, we taught you how to read and write. Who do you think you're
Mm.
talking to? You cannot use the remnants of the bones of my ancestors to drive your cars and then call me a savage, you know?
Mm.
And that's happened
Wow.
a
Say that
lot.
again. Say that one more time.
Oh
I've heard
gosh.
you say it before.
Yeah, like you cannot use the remnants of the bones of my ancestors to drive your cars and then come and call me a savage and deny me a
Mm.
visa or deny refugees a visa that you created to get that crude oil, you
Mm.
know? And there's
Well,
always the,
just a quick interruption
yeah,
here.
yeah.
What what was going through your mind when the U.S. invaded Iraq?
Well, everybody thought it was a video game. I mean, Iraqis were so demonized. Everybody's like, if Iraq exported tangerines, we would not have been invaded. It was not to liberate us. It's like Ukraine. If Ukraine exported oranges right now, nobody would care about it. Nobody.
Mm.
So it was known that they were after something that was, that we had the right to administer, and then it's also the demonization of the population. It's the comparison to Israel, I think. And it's also, once it's taken over, you remove a lot of the indigenous, intellectually sophisticated population and make them workers and bring in people that know nothing about that country, that culture, the oil industry, or anything. And then you have PhDs and engineers that are out of work. And gas right now in downtown Baghdad is around $18 a gallon, if you can imagine. And it was all getting pumped out by Halliburton, 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 Halliburton. Even our toothpaste was Halliburton. Everything was Halliburton. And so you can kind of see that even now with
What
Gaza.
is Halliburton for people who don't know
Oh,
that
yeah,
name?
that's right. There was Dick Cheney out of Texas. It was a company that basically it was originally, I believe, an oil company, but then it became everything to take over Iraq. So every contractor, like I said, book bags were even starting to be produced by Halliburton. So they were profiting off of the bodies of oppressed populations. They were just profiting off of that. And we've seen that happen time and time again. Diamond mines in Africa, I mean, even now The
And, oh,
Rohingya,
let me
yeah,
just say,
yeah.
I think people want to know that Dick Cheney is now CEO of Halliburton again.
Oh, yes, yes. And he was also, what was he? Secretary of Defense. So
Yes,
he was
yes.
Secretary of Defense and had his company coming, and it was, it was a whole
That
military industrial
doesn't
complex, right?
sound corrupt at all. Sounds
Yeah.
completely above board and
And even now to this day, they're still connected, some of those corporations, with refugee camps and reservations, and even the child detention centers. A lot of them, and prisons, of course, all flood up to that we're housing brown bodies, and that's what it is. It's a big, big money making machine. Whether you send them to a refugee camp, or you send them to a prison, or you send a child to a detention center, or you send an indigenous to a reservation, it is
So
a
you're
way of
talking about
profit
on both sides of the pond, Halliburton is
Well, there's
detaining
others
people.
too, I'm sure. I'm sure they
Yeah.
are. But yeah, I think a lot of those companies that profit off of war, I mean, how could any profit off of war be holy? After
Okay.
any kind of oppression.
So speaking of war, what is the solution for what's going on in southern Lebanon and what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank? I mean,
Well, I
what's
mean, bottom line is, according to Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, which happened during the Geneva Convention, an occupying force cannot claim self defense against an uprising of the occupied. That's just an oxymoron. The occupier cannot just claim self-defense against the occupied. I mean, that equation would no matter how you try your algebra, or no matter what kind of calculator, that equation does not add up. And there was meant to be a two-state solution in 1948.
so
That was
if I'm an
years. Yeah.
Israeli, what if I deny that I am an occupier, that I have,
Well, I mean,
historic right to this land?
there's these children that are calling themselves furries now. If a child says he's a hippopotamus, you really can't. There's really no conversation to have. Either it is or it isn't, or you know, it is. You have to go down to international law. I mean, if we all lived in a world where there were no outside laws or international laws or government laws, religious people, we would default to God's law, right? To try to conduct ourselves. That's not even what's occurring there. Not only blatantly violates international law, but also violates, Jewish law, Muslim law, Christian law, any laws of basic humanity.
But then, Sahar, uh, if I'm an Israeli, I'm gonna possibly say that God's law is what's in the Bible, and that my understanding of the Bible is that this land belongs to us, that we hold the title to it.
Well, you know, a lot of people, if they do, I mean, I personally don't know if God is a real estate agent or not, but you cannot make what is a crime for you law for me. It's like abortion. If that's a sin for you, you can't make that a crime for me. You can't.
Mm.
So everything is in its context, and that's why sometimes we default to, secular law, which is obviously based on religious law, but
Yeah,
the reality.
so if let's say I live in Tibet or Sri Lanka, somewhere that doesn't even recognize what the West calls the Holy Land, doesn't even recognize it as holy. I mean, more religions came out of the Indian subcontinent
Yeah, that we all model
than
anyway. Yeah.
yeah. But let's say I'm in Tibet or Sri Lanka or somewhere, Mongolia, and then someone tells me the Bible says that this land belongs to a certain population. How is that going to strike you when maybe you don't even know what the Bible is?
Well, yeah, that's a question of dominance. Exactly. Insertion of oneself. How arrogant is it for one country to say this country needs a regime change? I mean, imagine if somebody said that about the U.S. I mean, just the blatant, how could I say,
Well, they might be
And
right about
yeah,
the U.S., just saying.
yeah. No, but
But
the supremacy of, and that's where different, ideologies of scriptures differ. I mean, some people say that we're all one. Some people say that there is a hierarchy. I mean, some people say that only certain chosen go to heaven. I mean, who knows? Like, but that that might be your reality, but it might not be the reality to the rest of the population. And Imam Ali says there are two kinds of people in this world. They're your brother in religion or your brother in humanity. And so you're welcome to follow one path to the divine, but you cannot have your beliefs or non-beliefs imposed on everybody else, especially
Okay,
through
so
violence.
speaking of paths to the divine, what is the solution?
Well, the solution is to go back to the original borders of 1967, which are still pretty generous, because in 1948, when the UN declared Israel a state, it was set to be partitioned within specific boundaries. When you overstep, and greed and corruption are the biggest downfalls of civilization. When you want more and more and more and feel that you are entitled to more and have this impunity, that's when resistance is going to happen. I think, and even the other day, the head of the OIC, which is Organization of Islamic Countries, 57 Muslim organizations around the world, stated, if there is a two-state solution, we definitely guarantee the safety of Israel. We just need a two-state solution.
Okay,
And
so let me ask
yeah,
this. Let me ask this because I have talked. In fact, just yesterday, I had a conversation with I'll call her a diasporic Jew, and I have had conversations with Palestinians who think that there should be an embrace of a diasporic identity, and that the state of Israel should not even exist in the first place. What do you say to that?
well, I think Israel, the Jews definitely have the right to find a safe place that they feel safe. But even in Jewish law, if you are in charge of a population that is not Jewish, you have to treat them with compassion. You still have to allow food and medicine and equal rights and the right to live and the right to marry and to right freely. So they're not even. I don't even. It's like I'm the biggest critic of Saudi Arabian government, but I don't. Doesn't mean I'm Islamophobic. Like for example, in Islam there's only one king and that's God. So you cannot be a kingdom and call yourself a Muslim nation. That's an oxymoron as well.
So that would
You know,
apply to Jordan as
yeah,
well.
exactly. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And of course, where does that come from? It comes from arrogance. It comes from domination. It comes from control of natural resources. So I think if there was I think ultimately a one-state solution, which is a secular government, like South Africa, where
Like,
everybody is allowed to thrive. Everybody's allowed to thrive. Then we wouldn't have a problem. But what we have right now is a nation abusing the Jewish Bible. Don't forget our lineage is Jewish, all three of ours. So technically we might be, we have eligibility to that land too. I mean, how far back do they really want to go?
well, you
You know?
mentioned South Africa. It's interesting because some critics will say, well, look at all the problems and the violence in South Africa and the poverty that still exists in so many places. But here's the thing. If you go to South Africa, as I have, but I haven't asked this question, I know that I would get the answer though.
Yeah.
If you ask a South African, Zulu or Xhosa or Ndebele or whoever, whatever their tribal identity, you ask them, would you like to go back to apartheid? They would say no. No matter how as bad as things are, nobody wants to go back to that because it is humiliating. It is dehumanizing
Yeah.
to live with apartheid, and that's what the Palestinians are arguing.
Exactly. Exactly.
One of the things that I heard that really struck a chord with me when we talk about going back to the original borders of when Israel was first designated a state, that there is this narrative that even that was a peaceful occurrence, right? But it wasn't peaceful necessarily for the people who were pushed out of their homes, right?
Not
And
at all.
I think it's really important to remember that, right? Like because the narrative, and there's this dynamic that I find really troublesome, and it's kind of being highlighted in this conversation that the world is having around what's happening with Israel and Palestine. But it's happening in our social justice zeitgeist in general. And there's this idea that once somebody becomes a victim, they are no longer uh, open to critique of any kind, right? So, and I think that's kind of what's happened with Israel, right? That we've pointed out that because Israel, or because the Jewish people were subject to this horrible thing called the Holocaust, right? That now that we're to critique them is to be or to critique the Israeli government is to be anti-Semitic, and there's a conflation of those two things, right? That makes these conversations really hard. And then if I am pro a two-state solution, or if I want the genocide in Gaza to stop, then I'm automatically anti-Semitic. And it's like you can't get away from that conversation.
Well, I mean, again, we're talking about Jewish people that maybe really have embedded a lot of the bad points of the Zionistic ideology, so it is, I think they don't realize that the biggest cause of anti-Semitism at this moment right now is what Israel is doing. Israel is its
Right.
own worst enemy. And,
Right.
like I'm Iraqi. I mean, just because I'm Iraqi, I can't use that for every single reason, And if somebody who's a descendant of a former slave, if you say slavery was bad, it doesn't mean that you're anti-white. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't mean
Right,
that.
right, exactly, exactly.
So,
And yet
yeah.
that's what we devolve into, these
Well,
conversations.
victimization is very comfortable.
Yeah.
Victimization is very comfortable, and there's nothing more pathetic than having a grown man, a world leader, constantly play the victim. I mean, you have to have a little dignity of self as well,
Yeah.
and that's part of resilience and how you conduct yourself. And I know a lot of refugees around the world from different places that do not carry this thing. Well, you have to, or you have to, or you're targeting my religion, or that's a sign of emotional and mental weakness, I think,
Hmm.
and maybe a bit of cognitive dissonance.
And
Because, like I
rhetoric.
said, yeah, because like I said, if we criticize China, we are not anti-Confucius. If we criticize India, we're not anti-Hindu. If I
Right.
criticize the Pope, it does not mean that I object to canon law. I mean, that's when you're on a higher level of thinking. And then when,
Right.
when somebody tries to dumb it down, it's a form of self-preservation, and it's tragic. It's tragic because I really think that Israel is. I mean, obviously, the Israeli regime right now puts the feelings of its citizens dead last. I mean, that is
Yes.
apparent. Gaza is the size of two-thirds of Manhattan. And my God, 365 days of bombardment and military and bombs and starvation, and you still can't get your hostages out?
Hmm.
I mean, that's like,
Was it ever really about the hostages, though?
yeah, it's like the size of Los Angeles. I mean,
Right.
imagine, you live in LA. Imagine, 40,000 bombs or whatever, blah, 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 like a year's worth, and you can't find 80 people. So it is obvious that it is a means to an end of a greater land grab. And again, that's because that falls down to the ego. And when you have a corrupt leader, he will he'll burn you to the ground and demand the ashes to worship him. And that's what's happened all the time throughout history. All
And
the
he's got to stay out of jail.
has to stay out of jail. But the sad thing is any kind of religious war or just war, whether it's canon law or Islamic law or even my gosh, the gentleman that wrote the Art of War years ago, Sun Tzu, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
There are laws to war. I mean, war is I hate to use the word sophisticated again, but it is very intense, and there is an art to it. And I've heard so many times, oh, Iran failed because they only killed one civilian. Their mission was a complete failure. A sophisticated military attack only attacks military installations. It does not attack, civilians, does not attack houses of worship. It does not attack, land, animals, natural resources, forests. A renegade and rogue one You know,
And
we'll
yeah,
never
one
do
that's
that.
focused on genocide will do that.
Exactly.
But
We'll do
right,
that. It
yeah,
doesn't mean you're smarter. You know what I
right,
mean? It does not mean you're
right.
smarter. You cannot measure war by the number of casualties. You know, sadly, you're supposed to do it strategically, and it's a game. That's why it's called the art of war. That's why you play chess. That's why, you know, even when you're boxing,
Is
there's like, you know,
is would you say that's what the Houthis are doing?
the Houthis. Well, the Houthis are a form of resistance. Also, I think that they're using nonviolent resistance by blocking the ships. You know, I mean, they're blocking the ships. They're like, and even Namibia has done, like a lot of countries now around the world have said, dude, you cannot. I mean, there was even an Israeli ship that wanted to stop for an hour. I think it was Namibia, probably for a potty break. And they're like, sorry, our border is about 100 miles out. Sorry, that's it. You can't, I mean, I cannot participate in this.
You know, the thing is that people have memories, and Namibians, they do not want to be in solidarity with Germany because Germany
Yeah,
carried out a genocide there at the
yeah,
beginning of the 20th century. And Germany is basically partly responsible for the genocide in Gaza. You know, and and it's hard to be pro-Palestinian in Germany. You read the reports of, you know, even Jews who support Palestine, you know, maybe have a flag, a Palestinian flag, they get arrested in Germany. You
yeah,
know, it's tragic the way that Germany seems to only have two ways sometimes of
yeah,
operating, and that is,
yeah.
you know, genocide if we don't like what you're doing.
Yep. Well, you know, again, their perpetual victimhood, you always demand an apology and you always demand reparations. You know, and Germany, you know, is feeding, you know, is feeding into the very, very weakest form of Zionism. I don't even want to say Judaism, but it's not that it's hoodwinked. But like I said, if you're a perpetual victim, you always expect perpetual reparations. Always, always, always. And you know, it is tragic because anti-Semitism really is on the rise because of this. If President Carter said this, and I think when he first wrote his book, Peace Not Apartheid, I think in the first like paragraph, he
Yeah.
said, you know, if there is a Palestinian state, there will be peace in the Middle East. You know, and that's all that anybody's asking for.
Carter took a lot of heat for that.
Yeah, yeah, you know, and yeah, no, it's true. But as long as the ego is in charge,
So in I only have about 10 more minutes because I have a hard stop at 1:30 that and I have to prepare for a meeting. But um, I am curious to know what, I think so many of us feel so powerless, right? We feel so powerless to do anything about the state of the world, but I don't think we are. I don't think we actually are. I think that's actually a narrative that some of us buy into, or that we're fed, right? Um, what encouragement, what words of wisdom do you have for those of us who are horrified by what's happening and want to do something to do our part to change
the
what's
situation
happening?
now.
Yeah.
Well, we have to realize that we can all protest and hem and haw and do everything, but at the end of the day, our elected leaders are the ones that sign the checks. You know, and I mean, sometimes people are like, "Oh, I want this city to have a ceasefire solution. Oh, I want this." I'm like, no. You go to your congressman that took 195, million dollars from APAC,
Yeah.
and you tell him that, just because the people in North Carolina did not give him $195 million does not mean he can give $8.7 billion the very same day that Hurricane Helene hit. You know, I mean, when people start seeing, the blatant bribery of the people in charge, we really have the only control we have is to change policy to
We
make
were
it.
at a group
Yeah,
of us were at my Congressman Salud Carvajal's office yesterday
yeah,
protesting him selling out when we
yeah,
expected him to stand in solidarity
yeah.
with the dispossessed, not the wealthy.
Well, yes, and APAC should be considered a foreign agent. Like it
Yeah.
should be registered, and it's illegal for a foreign agent to give to any campaign in the U.S. I mean, imagine if Greece or if Tanzania or if anybody we started lobbying on behalf of those countries. No, again, it's the double standard. It's the waking up to. It's an issue of justice. It's not an issue of Muslim Jew. It's not an issue of Arab do. It's, I mean, it's an issue of justice and the equal distribution of resources to everybody. And when we start profiting our country off of, like I said, the oppression of a people, we are complicit. We are, completely complicit. And I mean, I hate, the slogan, but America first sometime. I mean, if Helene, the exact same day, September 26th, $8.7 billion was given to Israel, and Helene hit landfall.
Hmm.
And that's our tax money.
That's our
Yep.
tax man. Back in November of last year, the Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors unanimously made a statement to stand in solidarity with the state of Israel. And first of all, I thought, well, my
we're an
heart
agency,
sank.
Yeah.
My heart sank for all the Palestinians and the Muslims who are their constituency, who are our neighbors. But also, how is that the purview of, a Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors in the first place? Well, fast forward to 2 weeks ago, I was hosting organizing with some younger folks a voting event, pro-voting rally in the city of Lompoc. And one of the supervisors was there. And she walked up to me, and the first thing she said was, "I hope you've forgiven me."
Oh, yeah.
Because I had written them, right, saying I don't think this is appropriate for you to do, because you have people with different points of view in among your constituency. And so she said that. I'm going to go ahead and say her name, Joan Hartman, because they are public officials. So, if she was just a friend or someone that I knew, maybe I wouldn't say her name.
Yeah.
But I need to uplift her name and to ask her if she's brought this up with the other supervisors, if she's brought this up with her constituency, because it needs to go beyond me as the person who wrote a letter to her.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, I think, eventually our government is going to have to issue out an apology to the Jewish people because we've enabled them. When we give them money, the stipulation is they can only use that money to buy military equipment. Not for roads, not for clean water, not for, but, we've sort of made fools out of Israel too. I mean, we have. I mean, we are very complicit in the ultimate destruction of Israel. I mean, we
Wow.
are so enabling them, that we're making a fool out of Israel too. Everybody's making a fool out of each other. But I think one day people will have to say, okay, if a Jewish state does dissolve or, but a lot of it, we have a lot of I mean, the country has a lot of apologies to make.
It sounds to me like you're saying that the U.S. is like a parent and Israel's like a drunk teenager, and the parent is giving the keys to the car and say, just make sure you're back by midnight.
Yeah, and giving them a bottle of booze too.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
A bottle of booze, and so we're making a fool out of people that think, well, Israel's getting aid. Israel's getting aid. They're not really getting aid. Listen, I'll give you I'll give you $20, but you can only buy a machine gun with it. Okay, bye bye. And so it's perpetuating war. It's perpetuating it, and who's profiting? A lot of the congressmen, a lot of this. If there was peace in the world, a lot of people would not make money.
Well,
But
Jimmy
they would
Carter.
still have enough. They would still
Yeah,
have more
right,
than
they
enough
find
that
it.
they more than that
Yeah.
what they needed, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Jimmy Carter famously said that if anybody in Congress spoke up for Palestinians, they would not be reelected.
Yeah.
Well,
And
look
it's
at
true.
even our
Horrible.
Kamala Harris's with the Democratic National Convention.
Oh,
They
boy.
they simply wanted a voice at that a little bit of time at the mic, and they were denied that.
Yep.
And what's really disturbing about that is that I think that those voices represented the concerns of a lot of Americans. I think
A
a
lot
lot
of
of
us.
Americans,
It
a lot of us
But it's
are
protection-
horrified.
But protection
And-
of Israel. Yeah.
Yep, and we were not allowed to have that voice there, and that's really disturbing to me. That's really
Yeah.
disturbing to me.
And who's ultimately hurt? I mean, like I said, every single day, anti-Semitism tragically is on the rise
Yep.
because of the actions of Netanyahu and because of the funding, the coddling, and the blank checks that our government gives him.
And you know, Sahar, I think you probably recognize this, that anti-Semitism finds a home on the far right, but it just now has an opening, right? There are people there who are truly anti-Semitic, not anti-Israel, anti-Jew, anti-Semitic, and those folks, I mean, that's the home of the, the Aryan supremacy, KKK types, the kind of people you encountered when you were at Charlottesville. Those are the people who, saying Jews will not replace us, but now they're emboldened. Those of us who criticize Israel, we're not anti-Semitic because we are pro-humanity.
Yeah.
and
Moral conscience.
but this is what's happening. It's opening the door for this anti-Semitism to creep out.
Exactly, exactly. No, if we go to our congressman and we're like, look, our money, if we invest money, morally we have to follow that chain of the dollar. Like I really would not like it to be invested in porn, child labor, like, this, that. But the minute you say Israeli government, your very character is attacked. Your very character is, and I'm like, look,
Yes.
I cannot send my dollar to bombs to bomb children, 15,000 children, 25,000 children. And when I give you my money, it's sort of like a bestowed trust. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
following it along. I don't want you. Well, you don't like Jew. I'm like, I beg your pardon. Not everything
And
comes back to that
speaking,
default Pavlovian
right,
answer. You know?
exactly, and that the anti-Semitism that David was just talking about is leaking in on the far left, I believe, right, where there are these
Mm,
people that are so pro-Palestine, right, that they are
right,
ripping
right.
down
Yes,
pictures of the hostages and calling it
yes,
propaganda, and I'm like, no, that's a
yes.
human. That was a
Yeah,
human
no, that's
being.
tragic. I know.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yes.
And so that is the thing that I've been trying to point to that has made me so disturbed in this whole conversation, that if I say to that person, no, that was a human being whose picture who is suffering and whose loved ones are suffering right now. That is a real human being, and you have now lost a part of your humanity because you
Mhm.
can't see their humanity, right? And just because I'm pointing that out does not make me pro genocide. But that's the leap
Mm,
that is always made. And it
yeah,
frustrates me to no end, because
yeah.
and the reason it frustrates me is because it keeps us stuck in this binary rhetoric and doesn't get us to the heart of healing.
It doesn't. It doesn't. It's a gaslighting technique to keep us
Yes.
going around in circles. And,
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess the solution really has to be, I think if we could find laws to make APAC a foreign agent, I think our elections will be more balanced, and the distribution of our resources, of our hard-earned resources, will be used in a just manner. And every time people start to argue and they start to attack it personally, you've already lost the argument. You just have to
Yeah.
walk away. The issue is human rights. The issue is equal distribution for everybody, you know and that's it. As believers or as non-believers, that's our beef. It has nothing to do with whether Moses, I mean, no, no, nothing. I mean, and it's so ironic because all of our lineage is, Moses is mentioned, I think, 140 times in the Quran. Prophet Muhammad's mentioned like four. And so,
Mm.
people are out of act. I'm like, I beg your pardon, I'm a Semite. Come again,
Yes.
come again. Like,
Right. Right. Yeah.
yeah. So God, my God, just
Well,
help everybody. Everybody's hurting right now.
yeah.
Everybody's hurting.
And we need to, we
Mm.
need to feel what's going on. My friend Dr. Karen Rice, who was our guest speaker this past Sunday, said red lines don't change anything. You know, you just the fact that you saw a baby, a dead baby with her face blown off, doesn't change anything by itself. But when we embrace the reality and not numb ourselves, when we allow ourselves to feel deeply what's going on and take action, whatever that action, like you said, Congress or whoever, that's what's going to
Change, yeah.
create change. Yeah. So I
Absolutely.
know that we have to wrap it up. I
Yes.
appreciate you Carrie and I are so grateful for you
Oh
taking
no,
out the
thank
time.
you. It's an
Yes,
honor.
thank
It
you.
really
It
is
was
an
such a
honor.
pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Any final words, Sahar?
No, I mean, may God guide everybody to the best of their intentions. May everybody, like the meta prayer, may, everybody be free from harm, everybody be safe, everybody be happy. And that's all we want at the end of the day, to cease human suffering on any side, inshallah.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Please join us next time. We are people who have left behind performance-based religion and the shame that comes with it. If you have a personal liberation story to tell, then we want to know about it. Please contact us by email at imhere@davidnmoore.com or text us at 805-377-9388 because the world needs to know that God is not an asshole. The show music is composed by Christian Moore, the show art created by Evan Kerr, and the episodes are produced by Lisa N. Alexander.